welcome back to another video. In today's video I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in November for non-fiction November. I had a really good reading month for non-fiction November. I basically read all non-fiction books. I started a fiction book towards the last bit of November because I was like, you know what, I've not read a fiction book at all during this month. But yeah, the majority of my reads were definitely were non-fiction reads, especially all the books that I completed during November. In regards to my TBR video where I spoke about all the books that I was going to read for non-fiction November, I have read all of those books, but one which I'm in the middle of reading. I say in the middle, I've got the final chapter to read, so I will also speak to you about that. But did really good going in terms of the books in my TBR, and there was actually another book that I had added to my TBR that I didn't speak about in that video because I completely forgot it was an audiobook. So in total I read, I think, all the books on my TBR. One of them I had already started and I didn't finish that or even pick it up during that month, so perhaps I would start with that one first. And that would be The Source by Dr. Tara Swart. I just didn't feel any inclination to pick this up, and so I didn't. All the other books were definitely much more interesting, and I said, I think in my TBR video, in my non-fiction November vlog, which I'll link up below and in the description box, that I just found that this was the kind of book that I had to read in the morning, or like I just couldn't read it after work. It's just, or like before bed, because it just requires a bit more brain power and a lot more thinking, and I just didn't have it in me to do that. I'm on page 75, which is where I was probably over a month ago, because that's probably when I started this book. So I would say out of the books that I had on my TBR, this is the only one that like I really didn't even give a good go at, but never mind. This is a non-fiction book, but it's more of a self-helpy book, and it says here, if you could have anything you want in life, what would it be? Breakthrough in neuroscience are proving that we can actively alter the way our brains think. Now, world-renowned neuroscientist Dr. Tara Swart shows how we can all harness the potential to transform our mind, attract what we most desire, and seize the life-changing opportunities that pass us by every day. The secret isn't in mysterious forces, but in the incredible power of the source. And the source is your brain, so it's all about using your brain to sort of rewrite sort of old thinking and those neuro pathways, so that you can sort of have positive thoughts about yourself, and also just encourage yourself to do the things that you want to do and believe that you can achieve the things that you want to achieve. But there's just definitely more of a scientific spin to it, and that's the element that I'm struggling with. So books that I did read, let's start with, I think, the first one that I completed. I'm not going to do them in that order, but it might just work out to be that way. And the first one is In the Kitchen, Essays on Food and Life, and this is by a number of contributors who are listed on the back of this book. I started off really loving this collection. I read the first, this is split into 3 sections. So the first section is Coming to the Kitchen, the second is Reading and Writing the Kitchen, and the third is Beyond the Kitchen. I read the first section and absolutely loved it. I loved all the essays in it. I just completely fell in love. They were so varied in terms of the way people were writing about food and the way that it had affected their lives. For instance, in the first section, the first author is talking about, it's titled A Life in Cookers, and it's just basically about all the different homes that she's lived in and all the different cookers that she's had. I know that doesn't sound that interesting, but when you read it and the way it's like pieced together, it actually is really nice. And I think Rachel Roddy she now lives in Italy, and in it is sort of mingled other things to do with her life personally as well, which is quite nice. You sort of see that influence of food and how it has affected other areas of her life in terms of like perhaps when she was not feeling very well. And then there's another essay called The New Thing, which is actually, I think she is the author, not the author, she is the founder of Fig Tree, I want to say, which is an imprint now, I think maybe of like Bloomsbury or something like that, and they publish cookbooks, recipe books. Let me just make sure if that's the case. Yes, I am right, it's Fig Tree, but it is a publisher of Fig Tree at Penguin Books, not Bloomsbury. So that was quite nice. Cupboard Love by Ella Bridger. She's one of the authors that has written a cookbook that I own, and that was all about, it's called Cupboard Love, but it has a really nice sentiment of the fact that, you know, you kind of know when you feel at home with someone, when you've reached that stage of being past a stranger when you go to someone's house where you know where everything is. You don't have to sort of ask, oh, can I have a drink, can I borrow your cups, etc, etc. And then The Future of Food by Rebecca Liu was a really nice one. It started off quite being like media and culture, like I would say, focusing on like advertising in Hong Kong and advertising on London tubes, and then slowly started talking about Deliveroo and sort of those delivery services, and also talks about human fuel, the sort of packaging of food, and then moves on to talk about Gusto and HelloFresh boxes and all those sorts of things. And it really is a nice essay that, you know, starts off being quite wide and about society, but then comes back to being about her and how it sort of, those boxes have helped her find sort of achievement in her cooking. It was very nice. And then I'm not going to go through and tell you what every single essay is about, but in terms of the first chapter and really enjoying the collection, it was there. But I was like, yes, this is chef's kiss. And then reading and writing, I just found some of the essays okay. I didn't hate them, I didn't dislike them, but some of them I didn't really feel that much of a pull to, and I think sometimes with non-fiction it really is, what do you feel a pull to? None of these essays were badly written, so I will say that. What I will say is I didn't feel like these middle essays were actually as strong as the beginning essays for sure, or the essays towards the end. The essays towards the end, I definitely found some that I really enjoyed. There were two that I really enjoyed, and they were quite strong in terms of their content and also just, I don't know, the pull that they had on me. Whereas the middle ones, reading some of them, I was just like, I feel like these are a bit like filler essays, you know? Not so much, but they weren't as strong as the other ones. So yes, this was a collection that I was really looking forward to, and I did really enjoy it. I ended up giving this 3 out of 5 stars. Definitely, if the middle section had been stronger, it would have been a 4-star or 5-star read for me. But I have no problem going back to reread this, especially the sections that I did like. I think there was some really, really beautiful writing in here, and I would definitely have to revisit it. So another book that I read and finished during non-fiction November is We've Always Been Here by Samra Habib, a queer Muslim memoir. I did talk a lot about this in my reading non-fiction vlog. I did the same for In the Kitchen as well. But in the reading vlog I sort of said, you know, like I gave it 3 stars, and oh, to be fair, I did say why I gave it 3 stars. This is a really lovely memoir. Samra's writing is lovely. I would even go far to say it's exquisite. It's just really nice. It starts off with her and her family in Pakistan, and we find out about what her life was like in Pakistan and what the sort of relationship is between like her mum and her dad, and just what life was like for women in particular. And also there's a focus on here because of the type of Muslims that her family are, how they were sort of being persecuted at that time in Pakistan. So they actually end up moving to Canada when she is about 13. This isn't blurbed on here, so I'm not sure if I was saying that this isn't blurbed on here, but I wasn't sure whether or not them moving to Canada was in the blurb, but it is. They moved to Canada as refugees, and one of the really poignant moments in this, and I did mention this in my non-fiction vlog, but if you didn't watch it, I'm going to say it again, for me really was when she saw a vending machine with a can of Coke in it, and she like begged her mum for some change to go and get a can of Coke, and when she tasted the can of Coke, she's just like realised that the whole time in like Pakistan when I was drinking Coke, it had been a watered down version of this. And it's just so funny because she talks about the fact that I think they had to take the bottles back like when they finished the drink, and that's exactly the same in Ghana. Although I will say Ghana Fanta tastes 100 times more better than the Fanta that they have in the UK. I know it's probably just a ton more sugar, but it tastes amazing. So that was a really nice moment for me. And yeah, when she goes to Canada, she goes to school where she has to face racism from these horrible kids. They are poor, then you know no one's really working in their family because they've just moved to this new country and they need to get used to the different things that they need to do in order to survive. What else do they face? She has an arranged marriage. That is not a spoiler, it's literally in the blurb. And yeah, I think she's 14 or something when she finds out, something like that, so it's absolutely wild. And what Samra does is takes us through how she navigates this. I actually appreciate it also. I'm a bit like, it was sort of skimmed over. I appreciate how she talks about how she navigates this. I think there's obviously people in her life that she's sort of trying to protect and hasn't really gone into detail for that reason. I also think she says here that names have been changed as well and things like that. It's really funny talking about like non-fiction books at work. I just sat through a privacy and libel section for all new employees, like as part of your induction. I work for a publishers, and it was talking about the fact that, you know, obviously sometimes changing the names is not enough. If that person's easily identifiable, then you can't really like do that. You can't just put people in the book, and if they don't like it, then obviously they can sue you and stuff like that. But anyway, so yeah, names have been changed in this, and I think she sort of skims over these aspects perhaps because she doesn't really want to write in too much detail about what really happened to protect other people. But yeah, it talks about how she navigates that situation, and eventually it starts talking about how she you know, sort of comes to terms with her being queer, what that means for her, but also what that means for her as someone who is a practicing Muslim and still wants to practice her religion. You know, she doesn't want to be pushed out of her religion just because she's queer. And there's a real nice section of, you know, exploration and the different places that she goes and the different friends that she makes. But I feel like this memoir is like 213 or so pages long, and I really feel like it's after like page 150, 160, where we really sort of focus on that queerness section and sort of the Muslims section, and her sort of finding other queer Muslims. And I just wished, actually, in terms of the name and the title of the book of We Have Always Been Here, there had just been a bit more focus on that, 50 pages or more. She does talk about a photography project that she has done, which I think really is the basis maybe for the title and for that sort of, you know, sense of We Have Always Been Here, because she is interviewing queer Muslims, and it's all across like Canada as well as the US as well. And that's the only reason I gave it 3 stars. I feel like it's actually well written, it's super strong. I loved her, like, sort of inviting us into her life, but I actually thought in terms of showing the scope of, you know, the spread of queer Muslims, I felt like that was perhaps quite lacking in this memoir. Otherwise, there is no fault in this book. It's absolutely no fault. And when I was giving it 3 stars, I was like, I felt like 3 stars is quite low, but 3 stars is, you know, it's good. I did enjoy it. Didn't love it, didn't, you know, super like it, but I really did enjoy this book. It was good, and my criticisms are not really huge criticisms. Perhaps maybe I'm just a bit nosy, but those are my thoughts in the end. So 3 out of 5 stars. The next book that I finished is Writing Within the Walls: Stories, Poems and Articles of Hope by People in Custody and on Probation. This was a really nice collection. This I gave 3 stars as well. It has short stories in here. Really, they're more, yeah, short stories. It's got non-fiction, so essays in here as well, and then I think there's a really long poem in here as well. And really it just talks about people from all walks of life. So some involve talking about the like crimes that they committed and what sort of landed them there, and, you know, you find out about their background. There's actually one really nice one here, which is from, I don't know if she's like she's definitely quite high up, and I don't know if it's in Arcbound or a different sort of charity that works closely with them, but it's a personal story about how actually this person, this author, suffered abuse at the hands of their father, her and her sibling, and actually how, like, she has nothing to do with like being in prison and stuff like that, but I think maybe she works quite closely in terms of people who are in prison, things like that, and how that sort of abuse then sort of pushed her to like not even want that for her children and work with other sort of people who had been through similar things. So yeah, I just had to look to double check. She is the managing director of a charity that provides support for victims of abuse. So that was a really nice one. It really varies in terms of the content in here, so there's definitely like fiction stories in here, but then there is also stories about, you know, people who have been wrongly imprisoned, about the fact, you know, they're never going to say they did the crime because they didn't, which obviously means that they have to stay in prison for their sentence, and I think people don't really look too favourably on that even once you finish your sentence and things like that. And then yeah, there's a couple in here, I think, people who battled with mental illness, so it's actually a particularly sad one. Again, I don't know if it's fiction or non-fiction, but about, you know, sort of suffering from being bullied at school, and a whole thing sort of transpires. And that one particularly was really sad because, you know, you suffer through this great sense that it's definitely some form of abuse, but manages to sort of, I guess, through therapy, overcome that and stuff, things like that. Manages to go on, sort of live a good life, and then just a random incident of someone being a douche, and that's all it took. Especially when you read like the essay of them saying, you know, I didn't actually mean to like kill them. That's no spoiler or anything like that. These are the kind of things that sort of feature in the book in the various stories. But it was a very nice collection. I don't want to like talk specifically too much about each story, because I think actually one of the beauties of this collection is being able to read this for yourself and sort of connect with these people and see how they felt about the various crimes that they have committed, or find out why they are in there. So I thought it was a really nice, strong collection. I don't know if I said this in my reading blog, because I don't think I'd spoken about this, but this was definitely put together, I think, from all the participants, contributors that entered a competition, and the best of those got chosen for this collection. A book I listened to is A Curious History of Sex by Kate Lister. When I first started listening to this, I thought, I don't really know if I'm going to like this. I didn't really like the way it was read, and I feel really bad saying that because the author read it. But as it went on, actually, I was really glad that she read it. I This is actually a really wonderful look at sex across really mainly I would say the UK, but she does tend to include sort of what people are doing in the US. And I was going to say something else, another country, but I can't remember, but the main huge focus definitely is on the UK. The US is probably the second country that she talks about the most. But this is very, very interesting, and actually I don't know whether, I'd love to see reviews on this, because I don't know whether when you hear a curious history of sex, if you're just like wanting to hear about people like, you know, but it's not just that. Really, she takes you through like so many different things. She takes you through like talking about periods, talking about, I shouldn't laugh because it's really not funny, about like men getting surgery, like being convinced, you know, putting like monkey balls, you know, swapping that out it would extend their life, make them more like virile, would give them more energy, would make them feel younger again. Talks about, you know, things of the hymen and women riding on bikes. Talks about like sort of how women from Africa, and also I think it's more like Asia as well, how they were sort of paraded as being exotic, and sort of examples of like women's labias being shown to be like, this makes them very promiscuous, and these are the kind of people that prostitutes themselves. And also talking about like African men and the size of their penis. And in the beginning, I'm trying to remember what specifically that was about. Basically, it's not just about fucking. It very much covers sex along a very broad spectrum. Obviously talks about sex work and things like that as well. I thought it was a really good like varied piece. Like if you want something that's specifically focused on like say sex work, this isn't going to be the book for you. It's the last chapter in the book, but I thought for someone who has never really attempted to read anything like this, it was really nice to see all these little snippets into it. Like each chapter was just focused on a different thing, and it was really informative. I learned so much from this, just completely purely shocked by a lot of it. Like obviously the parading of like in the UK specifically, in this case that she was talking about, of, you know, a woman who'd come from the US, that they used to like just parade her around because like she had a big bottom, and because it was obviously so different to what they were used to in the UK, and it's just like just another person. But to see them as just so far removed from being human that you have to parade them around as some sort of experiment. And obviously the experimentation of women's bodies, but particularly black women's bodies, spoken about in this as well. I think Kate Lister takes great care in mentioning, you know, that she's not an expert on all of these areas, and not to get out of it, but to sort of say that, you know, she knows that these areas in terms of like the sexualization of black women and other races is, she's a white woman and she knows that she does not face that, but you know, she wants to talk about it because she is a researcher, she's a historian, and I think she takes great care and has a really good balance with that. It doesn't try and be like, I'm not going to talk about this because like I don't have any experience. Like she touches on it in a really good way and really tries to sort of explain to the reader and gives other readers a really varied perspective. And I just thought it was great. It covers so many things. She was really enthusiastic in her reading. I came away from it so informed. Even her touching on topics like abortion in the UK, and like I mentioned earlier, women riding on bikes. Like she just covers such a whole spectrum of things, like, you know, from periods, I've mentioned it all in the beginning, but you know, it goes everywhere, and it sounds a bit jumbled, but it's not, because it's split by chapter. It flows really nicely in each chapter. You can feel like it's really well researched, and I think if you're not well versed in any of these things and you just want a sort of overview in these different areas and how sex has been demonized in its many forms, I mean, even down to the fact of talking about like priests and the way they abstain from sex and things like that, like it's just really great. Like I never felt like it was too much centered on one thing. So I think if you're the kind of person who wants an overview of these little topics so that actually you can go further and do some more further reading, this is the perfect book for you. I thought it was so interesting and incredibly insightful. So on to two more books, and these are two books that I didn't finish. The first one is White Rage by Carol Anderson. I know I said this was going to be the first book I read when I did my TBR. It didn't end up being it, but you know what? I have no regrets because I'm really enjoying this book. I really enjoyed the other ones that I've read, and I'm thoroughly enjoying this. I've got one more chapter of it and then I'm done. And Carol Anderson is a badass writer. Like, she's the kind of writer that I really wish I could be when I write non-fiction. She's so strong in the way she writes, but she's obviously very knowledgeable about all these research areas. And what that means is each of these chapters really flow nicely together. Like, flow so nicely together. You're never a bit like, no, and you're never unclear about the point that she's trying to make. And I think that has to be something that you're really good at when you're writing about things like this. So it's split into 5 chapters, and honestly, America, please. So the first chapter is reconstructing Reconstruction. Number 2 is derailing the Great Migration. 3, burning Brown to the ground. 4, rolling back civil rights. And 5, how to unelect a black president. And these essays are so good. Derailing the Great Migration talks about the fact that, you know, once the South realised that, well, slavery had been like ended, terminated, and, you know, they were still keeping all the rules, but there was no chance of slavery anymore. Once they realised that all the black people in the South were going to migrate to the North and were migrating to the North, it's about the effects that they took to stop them from moving. You don't like them, you don't really want them there, you lynch half of them, you like shoot at half of them, but once you realise actually you are going to have to work the land, you're like, actually no, they can't leave. Like, it's insane. Burning Brown to the Ground talks about education and the sort of fighting force for education to be given to African Americans and funding for schools and things like that. So good, so insightful. And I think what really gets me about all of this, and what I really did not ever really clock onto, is in a lot of this she has a lot of quotes from what the president at the time had to, you know, were saying during this time. I was just reading this like, wow, even your presidents are super racist. Like, I was aware of this, but to actually say it, to actually have these things written down, like there's proof of it, I'm just like, no wonder why the little minions in the North are just running around, not in the North, in the South, are just running around wild, because if they know they've got the support just like that, why wouldn't you? And yeah, I think what it was is not that, you know, you hear about Donald Trump and all of these things, but to actually see some of these things written down, I'm just like, wow. To be honest, reading this, and I just think about these people and the causes that they were fighting, I'm just like, I have to heavily applaud them, because really they were fighting some huge battles, and I know so many people are still fighting these huge battles. I just cannot fathom it. There are so many families, so many people who took, you know, so many people to court over the fact that, you know, they were breaking all the amendments, breaking all these rules, and just kept taking them back to court, kept taking them back to court. And it's just so brave, especially in a court system that, you know, is heavily prejudiced against you. It's just so brave. But Carol Anderson's covers so much. I think the last chapter that I just read, she actually covers, she sort of does a little detour talking about the influx of drugs into the black community. But before she talks about that, she sort of explains a really nice background, which is basically about how drugs came into America in the first place and who supplied who the weapons in different countries and things like that. First I was a bit like, again, a little bit of tangent, which is the first time I saw it, but she brought it back nicely, and you were able to see how that actually fit into what she then went on to talk about next. This is a really strong book. Like, I'm actually quite gutted that it's taken me this long to read it, because reading it I underlined so many things. Like, I can't believe some of the things that are being said in here. So I've just randomly opened it on the page here, and it says here, Senator James O. Eastland, DMS, vowed, "We will protect and maintain white supremacy throughout eternity." Mississippi Governor Fielding Wright concurred, adding, "regardless of the consequences." And this is burning Brown to the ground, which is a lot to do with education, segregation, and no funding to schools that just basically weren't white but largely African American schools. I mean, it's things like that I see written down, and I'm like, you're wild, because you're really saying this and you literally don't face any consequences for saying it, so you feel it's okay to say it. It's those little bits in there that I'm underlining, like, this is freaking wild. So I said I was going to talk about another book. There's not really much for me to say on it, because I've already said it, I think, in my vlog or another video, but it was going to be this book. But honestly, I think I read like 2 more chapters during Non-Fiction November, so I still need to make a bit more progress. So yeah, read 4 books. These 3 are my outstanding. Oh, this one is back to front. Need to be on my outstanding. But this one I'm definitely going to finish in the next couple of days or so, and then I will definitely pick up the Swords. But that is it for Non-Fiction November. Let me know how your reading went for Non-Fiction November. Let me know if you have read any of these books that I've mentioned as well, and what your thoughts were about them. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you in another video. Bye.